It's making its way here. I joke, but it's absolutely destructive. Probably a terrible time of the year to make a joke about hurricanes.
Yeah.
But we are in hurricane season. I'm thunderstruck. Chase Myers, do you get thunderstruck? Does weather surprise you anymore?
It doesn't surprise me anymore. I'm just awestruck every time I get to talk to you.
Chase Myers, WSIC Meteorologist. You hear him about every 15 minutes here on WSIC, keeping you apprised of what is going on in the weather so you can know. You can be in the know. What do you need to grab before you leave? What can you prepare as you're thinking about your weekend or later on in the afternoon? Chase, but it is hurricane season, and so there is some movement taking place in the ocean right now. Is that right?
Yeah, things are pretty active in the Atlantic. You know, it was only about 2 weeks ago we were talking about how quiet things had been, but I said, you know, be on the lookout. Things will probably start to wake up, and that's kind of what we're starting to see now, especially heading into the weekend.
What do you got? What's cooking out there? You got to give me we got a name too. Let's start with names of these tropical storms.
Well, we've got a couple of names, and there's actually three systems right now out in the Atlantic that really sort of bear watching. We've had Gabrielle over the last several days. That one's kind of weakening down. So Gabrielle is now in what we call a post-tropical form. So it's really kind of breaking down. There's not much left of it, and it was never really a worry for us either. We've also got Umberto, and Tropical Storm Umberto likely going to become a hurricane really at any point. And as it sits out there, it's going to continue to churn. It's a pretty big storm, but it's not really headed our way. The other thing that you've probably seen, if you scour social media at all, or if you're into the weather at all, and maybe have heard about this, is that we have what we call Invest 94L. And you may be saying, well, what does that mean? It's really just a disturbance in an area that's being investigated, that's what we call Invest, by the National Hurricane Center and by the NOAA. So we fly planes into that, we get data through that. But that's the one that I think we need to watch. And as we go into the weekend, there's been, I would say over the last 24 hours, what I would say at least a concerning shift in the track that it may take. Now, it's close to Umberto. So I've had a lot of questions about whether or not Umberto and what will soon be Imelda, that's the system we're talking about, it will soon be Imelda, becoming a tropical storm over the weekend, maybe even a hurricane. But there's been a lot of question about what would happen if those two slammed into each other? Would it make a huge, monstrous hurricane, or would it cause all kind of destruction? And that's really not possible, but they do interact with each other. So if they're close enough, Umberto may actually pull this new area that we're watching, which will soon be Imelda. It may actually pull it out to sea. But if they're far enough apart, it could actually sort of slingshot what will soon be Imelda into the coast of the Carolinas. And so that's why I think we have to watch things closely heading into the weekend.
So would that be like Umberto and Imelda having like a hurricane baby?
See, that's the question I've got. Will that happen? And that really doesn't, it's not possible, really. You can't ever really combine the two, but each other sort of affects what the other one does. And if Umberto stays strong enough, then it can pull Imelda back out to sea with it. Not likely going to happen, though, because I think they're far enough apart. And as we go into the weekend, we were talking about this, and I alluded to this a little bit in your weekend forecast. Saturday's going to be a bit of a soggy day of weather. You know, that one's going to be tough to have outdoor plans and do things outdoors or really to find dry time. So the reason we have a wetter day of weather on Saturday is that we have an upper level disturbance. So that means basically a disturbance that's kind of living up above our heads. And what that's going to do is sort of sit over us, and that creates the rain for Saturday. But as that sits over us, it also brings a little bit of power to pull what will be Imelda toward us. So really you're fighting whether or not Umberto is stronger or whether our upper low is stronger. And just the way it's positioned, I think that upper low, that system that we have on Saturday, is going to be able to pull what will soon be Imelda, unfortunately, right into the Carolina coastline. There's still a lot of uncertainty with it, especially when you have two storms like this. It's really hard to nail down exactly what's going to happen because you also have to keep in mind, I know we're at Friday, but the storm really hasn't even formed yet. Right now, it's just a cluster of disorganized thunderstorms. So that's why as we go into the weekend, we have to watch it closely because once it forms over the weekend, there actually won't be much prep time. You know, usually we talk about a week and a half or 2 weeks of you have prep time as you watch it through the Atlantic. This situation isn't like that. So my precaution to folks would especially be along the coast. I think somewhere between the South Carolina and North Carolina coast is probably going to get a direct hit. Hard to say exactly where that is and when exactly that is. But that's what I would be watching. Monday, Tuesday, maybe Wednesday time frame. I think it's most likely Wednesday evening through the day on Tuesday, but we can refine that as we get closer. The other thing is, if you have beach plans this weekend, well, I'd probably find out what the reschedule policy or the cancellation policy is for your place where you're staying, especially going into early next week, because it will definitely not be great beach weather. And then the inland forecast too. If you watch sort of the track of where this thing is going, we talk about spaghetti plots a lot. It just kind of gives you different ideas of where the storm is likely to go. And as it moves inland, there could be a heavy rain and a flood potential, especially in eastern North Carolina, but that may extend down into the upstate of South Carolina and then up toward the Lake Norman area, depending on what the track of the storm is. We've seen this time and time again. You get a direct hit on the coast, and we kind of get the leftovers. So sometimes those can be powerful too.
Is there like a width requirement to be a hurricane too? Because when you look at it, when I'm in space and I'm looking down on the Earth, it's like a big white cloud, like a circle. Is there something to like that size? Because that's where I was thinking, okay, hurricanes for me is more about, okay, are we going to get that big, rainfall, kind of just the wet days for a couple of days, right? It's not necessarily so much the hurricane we're worried about here in Charlotte and Lake Norman area. But is there a requirement on like the width of those things at all, or no? Is that not part of the calculation?
No, there's never a width requirement. I'm trying to think back what it was a couple of storms ago, but it was Hurricane Aaron, back over the summer earlier. We talked about how wide it was. At one point it was about 700 miles wide across from side to side, from east side to west side. And so there's never really a width designation. It's all about hurricane wind strength. So once you find that center of circulation, whatever the strongest winds are what creates that category for you. So I think a lot of times people think about the categories are like, oh, well, it's a tropical storm. It's not a hurricane. But, we're merely talking about just that could be a mile per hour or two that designates between a tropical storm, a Category 1 hurricane, or a Category 2, depending on how strong it is. And it's not always the wind that gets us. You also have to think about, 1 year ago, almost to the day, we're talking about Helene up in the mountains. And that wasn't a windstorm. It was a rainstorm. So, it hit Florida and then a couple days later moved up the coast. So it doesn't really matter what the technicality of it is. It's all about impact. And for us, I don't think this is going to be a big wind system, but it could bring us, a pretty good soaking of rain. I think between the weekend and then on into Tuesday, Wednesday of next week, there is potential there for somewhere between, I know it's a broad spectrum, but somewhere between 3 and 7 inches of rain possibly. But a lot of that depends on that track. A lot of it depends on the timing too. And a lot of times what we see, and part of the problem with Helene a year ago, is that even if it comes in quick to the Carolina coast, once it hits land, it really slows down. And if it slows down and it keeps raining for a while, remember, rain this weekend, then you add more rain to it possibly with that system early next week. That could create a problem even without a lot of wind.
Chase Myers, WSIC Meteorologist. So they give their name at tropical storm, and they don't change their name once it becomes a hurricane, right? So we're just naming tropical storms, and then they grow up.
Right. And that's why a lot of times I think there's confusion. There's, you have disturbance, whatever number. Then you have invest, whatever number. And then you have tropical storm. You're like, wait a minute. So are all those things out there, or does something take a different name? So once it gets to your categories here, once it gets to 39 miles per hour sustained wind, that means there's a center of circulation, and that means that the strongest wind in the storm, sustained winds, are 39 miles an hour, then it becomes a tropical storm. Then once you get to 74 miles an hour, it becomes a hurricane. So once it hits that 39 mile per hour threshold, it becomes a tropical storm, and it gets the name. And it never loses that name. Even after it goes through its process, it starts to weaken down. Even if it's just leftover tropical depression, at that point, even a few days later, you say, well, okay, that's tropical depression. What this will be a Melda. But it keeps that name until its entirety, until it's totally gone.
Chase Myers, WSIC Meteorologist. We appreciate you stopping by, sir. Keeping us surprised. Wet weekend is what it sounds like, and preparing and looking toward next week and making those precautionary moves that you think is best for you and your family. Call your family on the coast. Let them know what's going on out there, especially North and South Carolina coast. Chase, we so appreciate you keeping us surprised, sir. Have a great weekend.
Got you guys. Have a wonderful weekend.